Hello everyone, welcome back. Today I'm going to be sharing another refutation for black in the Sicilian. This time it's against the Alapin. And the Alapin is one of these openings where white plays it because everyone says that they're going to get a solid advantage. Now, after reviewing and finding some good positional ideas, I finally found a refutation for it and it actually has worked extremely well. I found the Refutation about 2 years ago, and it really works well because it goes into one of the main lines but turns a very sharp turn, and it works very, very well. Obviously, unless your opponent doesn't know what he's doing. So, the Sicilian starts e4, c5, and the Alapin variation goes c3 for white as his second move. In this position, there are two or three complete main moves. First one, knight c6, which is probably the worst one. And then there are ties between if knight f6 is the best move or d5 is the best move. I play knight f6 normally in most of my games because I still think it's the safest. However, if you're playing against a less experienced opponent, so if you are a lower rated player, then d5 is the better move. And the main reason why is because after d5, e takes d5, queen takes d5, d4, and here you should play knight c6 first. A lot of people like playing knight f6 first, but this knight f6 won't work in this line. Knight c6 forces knight f3, and here there are again a few main moves. There's the move bishop g4, and there's the move knight f6. However, the next move is the move that I want to share with you guys, and it's really, really good. And the main reason is, as you will see, extremely counterintuitive. But it becomes intuitive later on. The move that I want to show you guys is the move bishop f5. Now this move may seem very weird at first sight because it wants to attack the knight on b1, right? But that attack on knight on b1 really matters. For example, let's just delve into the sidelines first. If white plays c4, I don't know why he would do this. You just play check. And after something like bishop e3, you can take the pawn. After knight takes, queen takes, castle takes, and this is at least equal for white. However, if instead you take, there's actually an even better move, and that's to play long castles. After long castles, you pin up the queen. In this position, after something like knight d2, you can play rook d4, knight takes, rook takes, bishop takes, and here you have two minor pieces for a rook. So this is even better. So that's the line after c4. And then after bishop f5, there is another good move for white. And this move, which is the most commonly played move, but not the best move, is move bishop e2, because that's where you always develop the bishop in the Alapin, right? Well, there is this very, very beautiful idea. You take on d4 first. Now, this is very counterintuitive. You don't take on d4 unless your opponent has played bishop e3. However, this opening has a very big drawback because of this. So after c takes d4 in this position, what does white want to do next with this queen on d5? So I'll just give you 1 second to think about this. White wants to play the move knight c3. And this is the whole point of bishop f5, right? Because if white wants to play knight c3 to kick off your queen, then you kick off the knight first. And if you do this, then after rook takes b1, you just play the move e6. And all of a sudden, white sees that he has no way of kicking your queen on d5 out. And this means that when you are playing a game in this variation, the rook on b1 becomes misplaced, the queen's attacking a2, e6 comes, the d5 square is perfectly stable, and here black is better. So we can come back here, and after the move rook takes b1, you could play queen takes a2 if you are confident your opponent doesn't know what he's doing. But if your opponent plays the move bishop f4, then this is not good news for you. After e6, castles, knight g7, here white plays the move rook c1, and all of a sudden you can see that black becoming very underdeveloped. If black plays the move bishop e7 and tries to play knight f6 later, then all of a sudden white can play the move knight e5. And this exploits the weakness on c6. If knight takes e5 in this position, d takes e5, and all of a sudden you can see that the knight on g8 cannot even develop, and move bishop b5 check is coming, forcing the king to move. So that's all the bad stuff of queen takes a2, but you can just play e6 in this position. After that, you're basically completely good to go, and there are no threats after. So that is a brief overview on how to play against bishop g2. The bishop takes b1 move. Very critical of this line with bishop f5. So if you enjoyed this first part already, then congratulations, you know how to play against 50% of Alapin opponents. However, the slightly more well-prepared would play the move bishop e3 in this position. Now this move is a lot better. The main reason is it connects the queen to the knight immediately, so the rook on b1 isn't as badly placed. After bishop e3 here, you do not play the move cd4. Why do you not play it? Because here c takes d4 is not a good move. You play the same thing in e6. However, in this position, white can play knight takes c4 now. After this, you can play the move knight f6, or you can play knight d4. After knight f6, however, white just takes, and after queen takes, plays bishop d3, and white has the bishop pair for nothing. White's better. And if you decide to play the move knight takes d4, then all of a sudden, now white plays c takes d4. And the move bishop b1 can be met by this beautiful move, which you can take your time to find as well. So what does white play here to get the advantage? Alright, this might seem obvious depending on how I phrased it, because I didn't highlight rook takes b1 immediately. But the move that white should play is the move queen a4 check. And main reason is now black has to play the move king d8. And after king b8, now white just takes back, and this king is just completely misplaced. White's just better here. Why does this work? Well, queen d7 is the only other move, because after b5, you just take, and now the king needs to move again. And if you play queen d7, the same move, bishop b5, pins the queen onto the king, and in this position, white's winning again. So that's long story short. Now we come back to the main line of why c takes d4 doesn't work, because white doesn't need to take off the pawn. He can take off the knight, and that will ruin black's position. So after move bishop f5, if white plays correctly and plays the move bishop e3, in this position, after the move bishop e3, black can play the move knight f6. Now, we want delay e6, and you'll see why. After the move knight f6, in this position, if white decides to play d takes c5, which is usually how you're supposed to play in these types of positions, as white, if you play bishop e3, then queen takes d1, king takes d1, and in this position, black has to move knight d5. And this is the reason why we delay e6. Delaying e6 seems like the bishop attacks a c5 pawn first, but with the knight on d5, it gets a tempo on the bishop. And now, because before, back in this position, back here, if you play e6 first, in this position after d takes c5, queen takes, king takes, in this position you try to go for knight f6, followed by knight d5. Here, white gets a very valuable tempo. White can play the move bishop b5 here. And after you play the move knight d5, white in this position can play bishop d4. And the main reason why this works is because now the knight is pinned. And because the knight is pinned in this position, the bishop on d4 is not threatened. However, if we just come back to the same idea with knight f6, if d takes c5 is played in this position, and after queen takes, king takes, knight d5, the move bishop d4 just doesn't work, because you can just snap off that bishop here. But an even better move in this position, before snapping it off, is to play f6. And this is the second point, because if white plays the same bishop b5 idea, now what black is playing e4, e5 in just one tempo. If you play e6 first, it would waste an extra move. So those are just the main reasons why knight f6 is better. And with this knight with this knight d5 move, it also refutes c takes c5 along the way. So after I play the move knight f6, here d takes c5 is not the best move for white. White here has two main moves. One, if he plays this move, if he plays the next move, which you will find in 90% of your games in this line, because bishop f5 is so rare yet so good. If you meet this move, then you know you're all set, and I'll give you the quick repertoire. However, there will be another sharper move after that. So firstly, let's just see what the common move is. It's just bishop e2. And now we just come back to the exact same variation. After c takes d4, c takes d4, bishop takes b1, rook takes b1, and e6, and you're all set to go. There's no problem in this position. And the main reason why this works now is after the move knight takes d4, you play knight takes d4. After c takes d4, you suddenly realize that, oh, the bishop's on e2, right? So that's a free snap pawn. And after bishop f3, queen g6, bishop b7, rook b8, The d7 pawn is firmly guarded by these two pieces, so no checks on this diagonal will be dangerous. And after this, white usually plays the move queen b3, because after bishop takes b1, which looks like it wins the knight, but it allows white to mate in 2, as you can see. So that's why in this position, black plays the move knight d7. And after knight d7, knight c3, queen b6, which trades off the queens. And in this position, the computer evaluation says white is better, but in my opinion, black should be better in the long run. He has a much better pawn structure, and this bishop, once developed, will become a very strong piece. Nevertheless, after bishop c6, king d8, here white can play the move d5. And this pawn does become really strong, but after you play something like knight c4, after bishop a7, rook b2, in this line, black should be fine. There's no big problem here. And if you're a lower rated player, this might be very, very favorable for black. So that's the basic rundown on the move bishop e2. Now, if your opponent plays this next move, that means your opponent is prepared against bishop f5, and you need to follow exactly what I'm going to tell you right now. If your opponent finds the move knight a3, now this move is very good against this line, and it's one of the only reasons why I haven't played this in so long, because at my level, people that know knight a3 suddenly skyrocket. So after knight a3, you should play the move e6. And here your opponent has a few choices. He can either play the move bishop e2 or the move bishop c4. Now, bishop e2 is actually the better move, but just in case, after bishop c4, here you're supposed to play queen e4. And after castles, c takes d4, here knight takes d4, and here you should play the move bishop takes a3. And after b takes a3, castles, rook e1, this forces the queen out, so knight d4, bishop d4, and queen f4. Now this position is very, very, at high level, it's common to play, and here this position is when white gets the bishop pair, but he sacrifices the two pawns over here. And now black has a better pawn structure, but white has the bishop pair, and in the long run, white will have the advantage, because these bishops are really strong, and this dark squared bishop on d4 cannot be budged. So that's basically the entire purpose of bishop c4. Now we come to the main line, and this is the part where white gets a better position, which is bishop e2. However, against bishop e2, there is one line that I've studied which brings black equality, but you gotta memorize this line. So mostly players play the move knight g4 here to attack this bishop, but after white plays the move knight c4, and in this case, after you play knight takes, the knight can recapture back. And in this case, if you play something like bishop e4 to pin this knight down, then all of a sudden the move queen a4 comes. And as you can see, now the c5 pawn is really gonna become a liability. If you take, then all of a sudden knight takes. White doesn't care about this pawn. White only cares about your knight. And if you play bishop takes g2 in this position, just simply rook g1, and sooner or later you're gonna figure out that this knight's hanging right now. If the knight retreats, then all of a sudden here, white just takes this for free, because you could not take back. There's a move bishop f3, and now your queen needs to move somewhere. If your queen moves, queen takes f3, then the knight takes. And if your queen moves back here, then all of a sudden bishop takes c6, b takes, queen takes, your rook's dropping, you're getting mated. Not good. Oh, whoops. That was back in bishop e2 line. Let me find where we are. So back at knight a3. Oh yeah. So we're here now. If you play knight g4, then after like some moves like this, the long story short is you're not in good position. So don't go for this. Instead, after bishop e2, you should play the move that I found, which is the move rook d8. And this move is actually very intuitive the first time you look at it, because it pins down on this file, and your king is still on e8, so your rook can actually still defend by coming up to d7. For example, if white plays the move knight b5 here, you just play the move rook d7. The move rook d7 covers c7, obviously. And after move d takes c5, you have the extra option other than queen takes d1 to play the move queen e4. This attacks this queen, forcing it to come to b3 or c1. If queen b3, however, black has to move knight d5. And here black is completely fine. The queen and knight are misplaced over here. The bishop's falling, the c5 pawn's falling. Black's fine here. And after, if white plays queen c1 in this position, you do the exact same thing, knight d5. And if something like castles is played, you take, queen takes, pawn takes, bishop takes, knight bd4, castles, king f2, bishop e4, knight c6, bc6, rook ad1. This position is about equal. White could be slightly better. Why could white be slightly better? Because in this case, the dark squared bishop, which looks like has to be one of the best pieces on the board, is countermatched by this weak pawn on c6. And although white's pawn on e3 looks weak, white can easily play the move knight d4, which blockades all of white's positions. So if white knows how to play the move knight a3 and memorizes all the way until this move, white is playing a no-risk game. There's almost no way that he can lose this position, but black can still play on. Black can definitely still play on, and this position will most likely lead to a draw, though time will tell. And for lower-rated players, this position might be a bit easier to play as black because the dark squared bishop is a lot easier to use and your opponents may blunder. So, to summarize, if you play the Alapin against the Alapin variation, there is a simple refutation variation that arises with d5 and playing bishop f5. And how bishop f5 works is if white plays the normal bishop e2 move, you take, and then you take on the knight on b1. That stops the move knight c3. And after rook takes e6, and all of a sudden you realize that black has playing a no-risk game here. And after this, if bishop e3 is played, after knight f6, your opponent needs to find the move knight a3 to at least gain some advantage. But after knight a3, if you play the move e6, and after bishop e2, you play the move rook d8 in this position, you're still completely good to go, and there is no big problem whatsoever. And also, this position looks extremely bad at first sight, you can still hang on. And in the traditional line, after the move bishop e2, you can just take again. In this position, after the move knight takes, you can play takes, takes, and you can grab the g2 pawn with no problem. After bishop f3, queen g6, bishop takes, rook takes, queen b3, knight d7, knight c3, queen b6, the queen trade, and after the check and king d8. In this position, black has no problem due to white's bad pawn structure. So, I hope that you learned something, and I hope that you've learned how to refute the Alapin, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye-bye.